Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Time for another episode of Nightlight Part 2. We have another new voice joining us this evening. Matt Adams is here, and his subject of the Stone Chambers of New England fits in perfectly with Ken Quiethawk's all-encompassing introduction. Matt Adams has been involved with examining the stone structures of New York and New England for a long time. A rediscovered stone chamber is Matt's primary focus now, and he has documented his observations. Matt's website is nehssie.com. Hi, Matt. How are you? You there, Matt? Barbara, is Matt unmuted?
Yeah, the microphone is slow tonight. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. There we go. You know, we had a little tech glitch there, but we're working through it. So,
hi, Mark. Hi,
Matt,
Barbara.
how you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah.
How are you guys doing?
Oh, I'm fine.
Thanks for having me tonight.
We are glad you're here. It's so nice to have another new voice. It's guests like you who are making us not resort to the unending UFO topics that are heard on so many other networks. But it's that kind of diversity that you bring that keeps people interested in our show. That's what we want to do. Just keep broadening people's horizons. So, I want to thank the listeners for that. Matt, how did you become aware of this undocumented chamber?
So let me rewind a little bit.
Okay.
About 3 years ago, I got real serious about researching a lot of the stone structures throughout New England. And I originally started with the intent way back in 2004 of wanting to do a documentary. Now, back then I had small kids, didn't have time or the funding to do it. And so, fast forward through life, we get to like 3 years ago, 2017, and 2016 was a nightmare for me. I had to move. I spent all summer doing things I didn't want to do, and I didn't get out into the world at all. And I said, I have to get out in summer of 2017, with a vengeance. And so I started that project back up. I was going out with my boys again and taking them out to see some of these things, and it got a little serious. and something sparked between my son and I, and we felt an energy to move this project forward. We had started filming some stuff, and we put out a video, and that was, I think I had started a Facebook page by then. So we put out this video of a stone chamber in New Hampshire, and like within a week it had 14,000 views, and we were like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, people want this content. So we got into it a little bit more, and I, just for fun, created like a documentary intro and had some music done for it. And when we put it together, like, we were moved to tears. Like, the feeling that we got inside when we watched this, we were moved to tears. It was that powerful for us. So we knew we had to keep going with this project. So the page kept going. We kept growing the page a little bit. And then last year, I started a Facebook group, which is, they function differently, right? The group, you can chat with all kinds of people. Everybody can share stuff. Everyone can see it. The page doesn't quite function that way. And when I started the group, I just was sharing photos and videos of stuff that we were doing because we thought it was cool, and we had the energy behind it. We knew people wanted to do this. Now we've got a focus in mind. We've got a goal. And the more and more people that came into the group, the more and more people started to share things with me. And so eventually one day I saw a post, and I don't even really think that this particular one was in my group, but a woman posted a stone chamber down in Connecticut. And I went to the Nira Archives. And for those of you who don't know, Nira is the New England Antiquities Research Association. They've been around since 1964, or I think even sooner, but they organized in 64. And so they've got like 70 years of archives, people putting notes and all kinds of study information in there. And it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. So I went to the archives, and there were no notes or site reports on this stone chamber. And I was like, okay, so there's something new here, and this was after, I'm going to call it the scamdemic, and if anyone wants to disagree with me, they can. But after the scamdemic happened, everyone's sitting at home and looking for stuff to do. So instead of going out, I contacted this woman. I said, hey, can you share with me a little bit about this stone chamber, and would you mind removing the location from online? Share your photos, but kind of the etiquette that we go by is we don't share exact locations, especially since this one hadn't been researched yet, right? So anyway, she sends me the coordinates, her and her husband, and we start talking and chatting. And I spent about 3 weeks putting what I could put together of a field report using the coordinates alone. And so, what kind of stuff was I able to even put in this field report? Well, she sent me photos, and I was able to, look at the photos and assess a little bit about the structure itself. I had them go and get the orientation to which it was facing, and it was facing southeast towards winter solstice sunrise. So there's that. And then some of the other things that I was working on at the time was, I had some simple questions. I noticed there's a group on Facebook, and the guy posts a lot of stuff, and he's usually looking at or saying, like, from this particular chamber, this particular star can be seen to rise. And so, where I am now as to who I think built these things, I'm more along the lines of Native American Indians and colonials or post-colonials. So I started with all of that, hey, maybe it was Irish Chaldee monks, and, I first got like Robert Ellis Cahill's book, and all of those ideas were presented to me. And, I just, after I got out in 2017, like strong, 2018, 2019, 2020, I'm at the point now where I just don't believe those things anymore. I just have seen a complete lack of evidence to suggest that there was a large enough culture to have built enough of these structures to say that, okay, these structures were built by, whatever people might have come here from somewhere else. I just, that's where I'm at with it. So for better or for worse, I know people have got their opinions, but that's where I'm at. So one of my questions was to get back and to tie that into this particular stone chamber. One of my questions was, well, what stars, or not even just stars, what were the Native Americans actually looking at in the sky? And this was a question that I directed to probably one of the best experts you could ask. The man's name is Herman Bender. And Herman was a guest speaker at Nira. I had met him on Facebook, and he was a guest speaker at one of the Nira conferences, I think in 2018. And he needed a ride from Logan Airport in Boston up to Nashua where the talk was. And I'm like 15 minutes from the airport. And when Herman and I had started talking online on Facebook prior to this, like months prior to this, the plan was always in the air, like, hey, if I'm ever in Boston, Herman's out in Minnesota, or Wisconsin rather, if I'm ever in Boston, we'll get together. So here's the opportunity to get together with this expert, Herman Bender. So I pick him up, we chat all the way up to Nashua. He's there over the weekend. I'm chatting with him on and off over the weekend. And then at the end of the weekend, I interview him for about an hour and drive him all the way back to the airport. And in that time, I had the opportunity to ask him a few questions and just listen. Now, I got to tell you a bit about Herman Bender. This guy, he's been invited into certain Native American circles that no other white person and sometimes no other male period, has been invited into. For instance, it is. It's a great honor. For instance, there was a circle of Native American midwives, and they saw their numbers dwindling, and they knew that their knowledge would be lost if they didn't find a way to record it and preserve it. And this was a circle that no man had ever been invited into, ever. And then enter Herman. So he goes, he talks with them, they tell him everything that they need to tell him, with the stipulation that he doesn't reveal any of it for 10 years. And that was for him to be able to sit on the information, digest it, embody it. And that decade is almost up, and Herman's got a book coming out. I'm not quite sure when, but probably within the next year or two. He's got a book coming out that's going to detail a lot of what he's learned from that circle. So this is the kind of person that Herman Bender is, and he's done a lot of this real close work with these type of groups. And he's the expert that I asked about what heavenly bodies are the Indians looking at. And he told me, the sun, the moon, obvious stuff. And then there were a few stars and the Milky Way. And I was like, okay. So I started looking at the Milky Way. And the Milky Way it's an interesting thing. It's always out there. We can't typically see it much anymore because of the light pollution. But if you get into a place that's dark enough where there's no light pollution, you'll be able to focus your eye on it sometimes. And I had started to wonder, like, hey, I wonder if some of these chambers are aligned to the Milky Way. Well, what does the Milky Way even mean to the Indians? Why is that significant? We know the sun, we know the moon. Those are kind of obvious things. They're always in the sky. We can always see them, with the exception of the moon, maybe a couple of days a month, right? But what's the significance of the Milky Way? Well, in a lot of Native American cultures, tribes and different tribes and different systems of belief, and not even just exclusive to North America, but worldwide, the Milky Way represents the serpent. And especially to the Native Americans, it represents the serpent. And so one of their beliefs is that the entrance to the underworld and the exit to the underworld, or from the underworld, align with the Milky Way. And that's where the souls of the dead go, during certain ceremonies. So at certain times of the year, like, for instance, solstices, there is a certain hour where the Milky Way, it's a ring around us, right? And at a certain time, it's maybe slanted in the sky, and then at another time, it stands straight up into the sky, and that changes throughout the year. As the sun changes and as the moon changes. Sun will change throughout the year, the moon. Yeah, exactly. So on certain times of the year, certain days of the year, it will stand straight up into the sky. And I started looking for those dates and those orientations. And in the sky, it's about it depends on your latitude, but here in the Northeast, give or take, maybe a degree or two or a couple here or there, depending how far north or south you are, it's about 230 degrees to 238 degrees, right? Somewhere, in there. And again, depends on where you are. But when I started to look out of the entrances of these stone chambers, I was able to find ones that are already oriented to either southeast or southwest. And around those areas on the horizon, about 123 degrees is the winter solstice sunrise, and then, like I said, about 230 or 38 or so is the winter solstice sunset. That's where I'm seeing the Milky Way. Sometimes it's with summer solstice sunrise and sunset. But you can, and those are the entrances and the exits to and from the underworld and in Native American culture. And a lot of the chambers that I enter into and look out of are oriented to these directions, more so to southwest, to the 238 or so degrees than southeast or any other of the two, like it'd be summer solstice sunrise or summer solstice sunset, right? Which is summer solstice sunset is 303 degrees, and I can't pull up summer solstice sunrise right now, but I think it's like 58 or something degrees. But the majority of these are aimed in the direction. The entrances are aimed in the direction of 238 degrees. Well, that's pretty interesting that we've got such a high number oriented to that particular direction, and we've got something that's, quite close to that is very important to the Native Americans. So that's the leading theory right now that I have, and I don't know if this is entirely true yet. I still have a lot of work to do, but I'm definitely starting to see a pattern of alignments that correlate to these certain areas. And the function of the stone chamber, why is it aligned to that, and what's the connection to the Milky Way? Well, as we both know, or as everyone knows who's listening, it's tough to see the Milky Way. And so I think the chambers are actually apertures, and they help block out any other light so that your eyes can begin to focus more on the Milky Way itself. So that's kind of where I'm at with some of these structures.
Yeah, Matt, you brought up a couple really good points. With that comet that is flying under the Big Dipper now.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wondered, like, are some of these chambers built where someone can observe, Halley's Comet? Just throw that one out. They you get the is that the Leonid meteor shower in November? That's predictable. But a lot of the other comets are so far apart. It's like generations are going to come and go before it shows up again. I just wonder if any of these chambers or some of the positionings of some stones were to mark a unusual comet. I'm just kind of throwing that out. I don't know if that's really been studied very much.
I don't think it has. And to be honest with you, that's above my pay grade right now. That's that's what I just wait for people like you to be on just to throw these stupid ideas out there, and it's like, okay, we'll let Matt do the javelin catching on this one. I just don't know either. I just wonder if it's like the building of Newgrange. It's so precise, but with the Irish clouds and rain and precipitation all the time. How many generations did they have to just sit there waiting for? Okay, hey everyone, let's come back next December 21st. To get this, one rock, moved down another inch or up another inch, and because it is precise. I just wonder if we're missing something at some of these prehistoric sites that really are accurately lined or laid out. Well, I've got a great answer for you for that one, as far as being able to see like sunsets or sunrises on cloudy days, on solstices goes anyway. Comets, I think, is pretty complicated, but when it comes to the sun, as far as solstices go, most people don't know this, but the sun is in about the same place, give or take a fraction of a degree, which is not even noticeable by the naked eye, for about 2 full weeks, about a week before the solstice and about a week after. It's not very noticeable, the difference. And it's not even a full progression to one point and then back again. It gets to a certain point and then it kind of bobbles around. And what do I mean by that? The setting of the sun, the closer you get to December 21st, let's say, it's not a slow progression until it gets to December 21st. And then after December 21st, it's a slow progression back in the other direction. That's not how it actually works. It bobbles around a little bit each day. And some days, it might get closer every other day. That's what I mean by bobbles around. It gets closer every other day. And so then maybe December 31st, it's the actual furthest it's going to be, but you really can't tell the difference because it's just imperceivable to the naked eye. And then after that, for the next week or so, it's doing its bobble thing again. So the day after the sunset on the 21st, like on the 22nd, it'll be a little bit further away, and then December 23rd will actually be between the 22nd and the 21st, and then it goes back on the 24th to being further away, and then on the 25th it's a little bit closer to where it was on the 21st. And it bobbles around like that for, like I said, about 2 weeks, 1 week in either direction. So that's how the sun is actually moving. And, how did I figure this out? Well, there are sun calculators online. Just go to Google, type in sun calculator, and put in your coordinates for wherever you are. And when you look and you change the date on the calculator, and you take a reading of exactly the degree that it's going to set at for each day for a week before and then a week after. It's a total of 14 days, right? And you just get that reading, and when you look at the reading, that's what you'll see. So it's not a perfect progression in either direction, but you've got 2 full weeks to set that stone. So sometime during that 2 weeks, if you get a clear sky, you're good. It's not as difficult as we think it is. You've got 2 full weeks to set that stone.
Okay, and Matt, speaking of these observations, and like the southeastern orientation, and you mentioned patterns a few minutes ago. I know Dennis has talked about what was the watch house at America's Stonehenge. It's like the only structure there that has a southeastern orientation. We do see patterns in areas. Some of the New England places aren't that far apart. When you get to other areas, there's a regional difference of like the solstice sunrise is going to be in the same direction, but there are regional differences for some of the observing some other like focus on cross-quarter days or something like that, a certain constellation. These patterns that we keep finding throughout the ages seems like whoever is building these places are astute observers of various celestial events.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they didn't have TV, right? They didn't have computers. They didn't have cell phones. What were they doing? What they have to look at? And what we find,
they did a great job of what.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. What we find is that the things that are out there, the beliefs that they held must have been so common, like the knowledge about these things must have been so common that everyone in the tribe knew what it was from a young age. I was recently at a site in Maine, and there's a big stone pile there, whether it's a native construction or a farmer's construction, that's debatable. But there's one thing that we found there that I don't think is debatable. And, by all means, if somebody has a better answer to this than I do, please get in touch and let me know, because I don't know everything, and I'm learning new things all the time. And the more I talk with people, the more I learn, right? So, but here's what I think is non-debatable. There's a stone wall, and one side of it aligns to the southeast, 123 degrees, exactly where the winter solstice sun will rise. And then the other side of it is 180 degrees away at 303 degrees, which is the summer solstice sunset. So you've got the sunrise on the shortest day, and you've got the sunset on the longest day. And the stone wall is aligned to both of those events, right? Now, if you're a surveyor and you're out, and now I've seen this not only in Maine, right? This is just the most recent place I've seen it. And it's not even only with stone walls. There's a place in Massachusetts where I've seen a row of boulders aligned on a hill, not the top of the hill, but like the edge of the ridge. There's like a drop off on one side of this, and the ridge just drops off. But the boulders are aligned that way. Okay, so it's not just walls; it goes beyond walls. But let's just run with this argument about the surveyor. If you're a surveyor and you're out and you're plotting, land for whoever, right? And you're, that's what your job is. You're out there, you're doing that. Are you going to align the boundary of someone's land to 123 degrees or 303 degrees? Those just kind of seem like not round numbers. You know what I mean? It doesn't make much sense. And would the surveyor have that kind of knowledge? Would he know, 123 degrees, that's where the winter solstice sets, so, maybe the wall can go this way, and then 180 degrees the other way is 303 degrees. That's the summer solstice sunset. You know what I mean? Like, why would he pick that? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Like, wouldn't you use maybe 120 degrees or 300 degrees?
It's things like that seem very odd in what Barbara and I talk about frequently when this subject comes up. You get some of those like megalithic yards, like why don't you just make it like the metric system where everything's like based on tens. You get these like really odd numbers. Like what does that have to? How'd you come up with that? Can you make it any more difficult on us? But what don't we understand about that time period?
Right. I mean, there was so much knowledge that got lost. I'm going to talk about this, and I know it's a contentious subject. There's a lot of people these days that wish to, rewrite history, certain parts of history. Our history, the history of the planet, is filled with good and bad, right? And a lot of people want to rewrite some of the bad right now about the United States and whatnot.
The statues,
or the Americas
statues down.
Yeah. I mean, we don't even have to get into that per se, but in the book 1491, Charles C. Mann had done quite a bit of research into the topic of how the Americas were before Columbus got here, and some of how it was after, like how the Americas were affected, and his follow-up book was 1493, and that talks more about how the world changed based on the interaction with the Americas. But anyway, in this particular book, 1491, a lot of the research that he did and also uncovered, sometimes it was other people's research, but he uncovered that there were, plagues that decimated the Indian population in the 1500s and in the early 1600s. Now, this was before people knew how to weaponize disease. And so the contact between Europeans and Indians, while it was probably violent, I'm not going to argue that point. The only thing that I want to argue here is that the transmission of disease was not purposeful at that time. There are incidents later where, yes, some smallpox blankets were given to Indians, and that's a terrible thing. I'm not even going to argue that. But it wasn't happening in the 1500s, it wasn't happening in the 1600s, and it didn't happen in the 1700s. It happened in the 1800s. So for 300 years, we've got Europeans interacting with Indians for better or for worse, and we've got the incidental transmission of disease, and that absolutely decimated beyond what we can even possibly comprehend the population here in the Americas. There may have been 56 to 100 million Indians on both continents that died solely through disease. Now, if that didn't happen, the Americas would not have been conquered by Europeans. By sheer numbers, it wouldn't have happened. But because that happened, the population decreased drastically, like we can't even comprehend. And the amount of knowledge that was lost. And this is typically why I enter into conversations with people who, that can't possibly be Indian. And, well, why not? The Indians didn't do it. Well, how do you know? Well, they didn't build in stone. Or, the Indians won't claim credit for it. Well, it's possible that the Indians that are alive today don't know because that information was lost. I'm willing to accept that that's a possibility. I think it's more of a probability than a possibility. But I think it's something that people need to take more into consideration when they think about these structures.
Okay. Matt, you just mentioned the decimation of the population starting in the 18th century up until today. Looking at your Nessie website as well as what Barbara documents in her Secrets of the Stones, there are hundreds of thousands of miles of these stone walls throughout New England. Right, that's going to require a sizable population to make that many extensive structures. What's interesting? Then we have the stone chambers, which like Manitou says that it's more built for like the shaman, like the astronomer of the community, to just be seated inside of it to observe Orion, just say Orion, coming up over the hill, and that's the time of the year to start planting. Okay, so but these stone structures aren't, or the stone chambers aren't large enough for burials. It doesn't seem like there are any burials being found near there. Where were the people buried? But we know they did engineering projects. That's pretty interesting. But there had to have been a huge population at one time. Who knows if they were making like the pilgrimage circuits throughout the season, and during the summer they were building walls in New England.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that and dive into that a bit. That's when I started getting out and through 2017, 2018, and 2019. That's really when my mind started to change about who I think built all of this stuff. When you realize just how much is out there, ideas like Druids, Phoenicians, I can't say for sure that some of those cultures never made it here. I don't think that they did. I'm open to the possibility, show me some more solid evidence. And there are a lot of weird artifacts around that do suggest that there was contact, But I don't think that there was any culture here large enough to have built any of these things, except for the Indians and the Colonials, the early Americans, or European Americans rather. But like when you go from Pennsylvania to Maine, and you go to all these sites in between, that's when you really start to understand the bigger picture, right? Now, when I didn't have that bigger picture, it was very easy for me to speculate that, Irish Chaldee monks came here and made a bunch of stone chambers. That was easy for me to believe because I didn't have enough information. But like I said, the more I got out there, the more I saw like the endless miles of stone walls that sometimes follow you down the highway. If I can wax poetic in any vainglorious attempt to replicate Barbara's wonderful documentary there, when you see that much, you realize it had to have been somebody that had the numbers. And not only the numbers, but the time. And I don't mean spare time. I mean centuries of time, millenniums of time, maybe. And we know that there are certain cultures like the Hopewellians, the Mississippians, and other cultures that rose and fell in the Americas, right? We know that there was a great Algonquin nation throughout the Northeast United States and into, even like central Canada, right? Why do we overlook the Indians as possible builders for a lot of these structures? Why do people so easily overlook them? That's what I want to know. I did. I overlooked them. And it was, Indians didn't build in stone. But you look around and you really start to investigate and you start to see different things. But for you to make, I know Barbara did the math. Barbara and Patrick did the math. For you to build a mile of stone wall, you don't just have to have the amount of people needed to build that mile of stone wall. You need to have the society that can feed those people. you need to have not only the desire to build a wall or the need to build a wall, you need to have the labor to do it. And those two things don't come together unless you consider the Native Americans who had, essentially endless amounts of time, right? They had, 12 to 15,000 years between glaciers and now, or, at least 400 years ago. They had that much time to do it. Think about this, right? Artifacts, arrowheads. Let's just take arrowheads. If one arrowhead was lost per year, that's 15,000 arrowheads. If 2 arrowheads were lost per year, that's 30,000 arrowheads. See where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. They had so much time. And I truly believe they had the numbers to make a lot of these things. Okay, so why would they do it? What reason would they have? One, their spiritual beliefs. You're not going to, build these things for nothing. You have to have very firmly held. Why do we build churches? Why do we build any kind of temple?
It suits a basic human need.
Yeah. Religion or spiritual belief is a basic human need. And what will they serve any purpose aside from religious? Yeah, it's possible. It's more likely probable. Some of these stone walls, they're not even walls. They're serpent effigies. You can follow them to the end sometimes, and I've done this, and I see, and even ones that look straight or meander a little bit, and you get to the end of it, and there's a larger stone, and this boulder looks like the head of a snake. And that ties in with the serpent from the Milky Way. And not only that, but in Native American belief, in their belief system, the serpent was an animal that could travel between the earth and the underworld. There were 3 levels in the Indian beliefs. There was the underworld, there was this world where the people lived, the people meaning Indians, and there was the sky world where certain deities existed and the birds flew and where the heavenly bodies are, right? So that's why you have symbology like the thunderbird, right? Great thunderbird in the sky that brings the thunder and the rain. You've got the serpent who can travel between the underworld where, they knew where water was. And, certain stone was they looked at, like flint, for example. If they made an arrowhead out of flint, flint was a gift from the earth. It was a gift of, we know you can shape this. You can use this to hunt and feed yourselves. Right? And imagine how hard that was, too. Imagine how hard it was to learn how to, nap the perfect arrowhead. It's a skill. And, at what age do you start learning how to do that? And then you've got to hunt with these things, right? And this ties in, listening out there, thinking all right, where's he going with this? He's just going all over the place. I'm not. I'm talking about the functionality of stone walls, right? One functionality of stone walls might be game drives. We see some of these larger walls, they're 6 feet wide. Why? They're 6 feet wide, 5 feet tall. Why are they that large? one answer might be game drives.
Mm-hmm.
They'd chase the animal up against this large stone wall, large barrier, to be able to hunt. And then we know that farming. I mean, we know more so that the Mississippians and the Hopewellians were farming. We don't hear much about the Algonquins farming, although I'm sure that they did. Why wouldn't they? I mean, we know that there was giant cornfields in New York, giant fields of maize. So again, how does this tie back to stone wall? Well, we also know that the Native Americans would burn the land. Now, for a couple different reasons. One, insect control. If you've ever gone out in the woods, you know how awful it can be when you get eaten by mosquitoes or,
ticks.
If you even pick up one tick, right? So how did the stone walls function when it came to burning the land? Well, that would be a fire break, right? The fire's not
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not going to get past the stone wall, right? Hypothetically, if you're, continuously burning the land like they did, they would section off a portion of land and rotate every 3 years, right? Every 3 years they would burn one section, if they quartered it off. Every 3 years they'd burn one section of that quarter and grow in the other three. And, well, why would they do that? Because they knew that they had to refresh the land. They had been farming for how long? Long enough to have learned that. So we've got all different kinds of functionality for these stone walls. And it's like, oh, well, sometimes those answers are more obvious than you think.
Oh, yeah, you are making sense. Now, and you note that there are two different types of walls near this undocumented chamber that you've been studying.
Yeah.
Do you think that those walls were a part of this fire break near could they have served some other purpose?
That's interesting. The serpent effigies, sometimes they're short. I saw a stone wall that I believe was actually a serpent effigy the other day in Rhode Island, and it was maybe 30 feet long, and a cart path had kind of been put in, through it. So the middle section was not there, but one end of the stone wall was built up more like a head, and it just kind of ended about 3 feet up, right? On that end, it was like 3 feet tall. And then on the other end, it like petered out. The small stones petered out until it went into the ground. Well, what is the purpose of that? What is it even there for? It's 30 feet long. What function does that serve? Probably not much other than spiritual belief. And this is what we, this is what we know as ceremonial stone landscapes, CSLs. These have been investigated more and more over the past probably 20 years than before that. But it seems that all the older ideas about giants or whatever people want to think, those ideas persist. when we're actually getting answers that I think make much more sense and have much more basis in reality.
Yeah, Matt, the 30-foot long snake effigy you're talking about, it's there. One end does look like a snake head. It's 30 feet long, or kind of back to that 123-degree angle. You mentioned it towards the beginning of the show. You get some of these odd numbers of distances. They really don't compute to our way of thinking, but there were like standard units of measurement. Found at places like Poverty Point. The Hopewell had used at like was it 1,050 feet as a diameter of some sort. So you get these use of mathematics. They're very precise. It's just the use of these odd numbers that is actually really thought-provoking. I just wondered, like, how much this standard unit of measurement was actually employed, but we don't understand it today. There's the megalithic yard. Was there something else that was used?
Now, see,
I've just wondered about it. It's very interesting.
I don't go out and measure stuff. My buddy Larry wants to measure everything, and he wants me to measure things, and I probably should, right? I've just actually, I'm being taught a new way to investigate the stone chambers, and that's to learn how to break down the floor plan and kind of discover what system of math was used to build it. I can't talk about it because I don't know it yet, so I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? But I want people to know that that's in some instances, yes. And I don't know if it was employed by Native Americans or not. But what I do know is that Linda Zimmerman, she's down in, I think, New Jersey or the Hudson River Valley. In her book, Mysterious Stone Sites of the Hudson River Valley in New Jersey, I think, she writes about a system of measurement that she discovered at a site in the Ramapos. Those are mountains in southern New York, northern New Jersey, for those that don't know. She discovered a system of measurement, and it's halved and doubled, and it's an odd kind of measurement. It's not something that we would use, but yet there it is. So maybe they did actually have that. I'm not the guy that goes out and measures everything, so I don't have much to talk about in that regard, but there is somebody who does, and that's one of those things that when I go, what's my mission? When I go to a stone chamber, what's my mission? I'm looking to see, does it align with, certain points on the horizon or not, My argument is that if we can come up with a graph that shows that, X amount of chambers are aligned to the specific spot more so than any other, then that lends to the possibility that they might actually be Native American in origin. There are actually people who have done just that, not with the chambers, but with mounds out in the central part of the country. I think the Facebook group is Friends of Serpent Mound. I hope I'm quoting it right, but
that sounds right.
These guys have been, they talked to Herman Bender too. And then they went out and they started looking, and this was unbeknownst to me, but they went out and they started looking to see if they could come up with a system where they could look at a mound and figure out if a certain part of it aligned to any particular direction. And what do you think they found? A lot of mounds that they investigated, they looked at them, and where do you think they'd aligned to? 238 or so degrees, the winter solstice sunset, the entrance to the underworld. Huh. So these guys started releasing their research over the summer, over the spring, within the last couple of months, and it's amazing to look at what they've done, and to think that, like, I'm just starting really to kind of do that research, right? But they've done it. And they were successful at it. At least they're arguing that they were, right? But here, this is a multi-year project for them. And this is the conclusion that they've come to. It's beyond exciting, It's like, here's a different part of the country, different structures altogether. Yet they're finding the same potential spiritual, ceremonial connection to this that I think that I'm starting to find. It's beyond exciting.
And if you look at your website, some of the places you visited, like in Pennsylvania, Barbara's movie, Secrets of the Stones, has some photos of there's like a cluster of cairns. Both of you were at the same, looks like the same place. I'm not sure if you sit at one place and this summer solstice sunrise comes up over one cairn, or how it works. But when you look at what was done there, the placing of the cairns, the engineering of all these, like beehive-looking cairns, you get some of those down the eastern seaboard. In other areas, you may have, like at the Serpent Mound in Ohio, you have the solstice and equinoxes built into which coil of the Serpent Mounds is going to be visible. It's really interesting how the different regions portrayed the same. They wanted to participate in the same event. They're just engineering their works in different ways. And it's like the Serpent Mound is different from like all the chambers or the cairns in Pennsylvania. It's just a really interesting concept. You know, there's probably some evidence of the cultures mingling and exchanging ideas.
Yeah. The thing about that too is like cultures don't even have to mingle to have the same ideas, right? There are instances where two different cultures on two different sides of the planet have come up with the same way of, you know, whatever it is, whether it's working with stone or whether it's coming up with certain bead designs or coming up with certain, I think there's an experiment, or not an experiment, but like a project that's keeping track of old symbols, you know, that have been found all over the planet. Were these cultures necessarily connected? No, they didn't have to be. I think there are certain inevitable things that we come to, or conclusions that we come to as human beings, whether it's a conclusion, a mental conclusion like, hey, the sun sets in the same, or like that would be an observational, right? But the sun sets in the same place, you know, one time of the year and then starts going back in the other direction. That's a conclusion. And then, you know, maybe the conclusion is like, oh, here's a good way to put thread together to make cloth or clothes. Here's a good way to weave baskets together. You know, we'll take similar materials and you know, hey, if you work it the same way, it makes essentially the same thing. You know, there's not what is it? Forget what it is, but correlation doesn't, you know, similarity isn't the same thing as correlation, essentially. I'm not saying that right. I know I'm not, but I can't pull it up right now.
But, there's, you know, like the swastika originated in India thousands of years ago, and there's the copper. There's a copper piece of artwork found in a burial mound in Chillicothe, Ohio, about 2,000 years ago when the person was interred. So, does that mean there was exchange of a meeting of people, or did people who never met came to the same realization of using this symbol to represent the four cardinal directions?
Right.
It's really fascinating to ponder that. You know, some of the people were circulating for their pilgrimage rites, but it's just really interesting how people in different regions express some kind of connection to a deity.
Yeah, and a lot of the deities of different systems of belief end up having commonalities as well. I mean, you look at, I don't want to go into examples, but you look at certain gods of rain. Well, why is there a god of rain to begin with? Because people couldn't express, probably didn't know what caused the rain to begin with. So they had to explain it some way for them to make sense of it. Similar to the way that I was believing that, Druids built all of these stone chambers. I didn't understand a different way how it could have been done.
That's where you get the tradition. As many of the native traditions have been intact for thousands of years, much longer than many, just say a lot of traditional Christian beliefs.
Right.
The concept has been around for such a long time, but these stories that have existed within their culture unchanged for thousands of years. That shows how strong the people have been for all this time.
Yeah, I mean that's why you've got like the Jungian archetypes, right? Like Carl Jung.
Yep.
You've got Jungian archetypes. Why? I mean, there are certain, like Star Wars was as successful as it was because it followed the hero's journey, like the classic hero's journey. And now the elements in those types of stories, they're essentially in our DNA at this point. I mean, they're just, humans identify with those stories. Sometimes they're metaphoric, sometimes they're not, but we identify with them, right? We all go through something like that in life, or we will at some point, and maybe the story of the hero's journey gives us the answer sometimes before we need it. But yeah, there's the reason that those movies sit well with people, and people hold them close to their heart. It tells the human story. And those stories, you're right, they have survived for thousands of years. And whether it's through storytelling or through religion, different belief systems often borrow from one another. Look at what Christianity did with pagan beliefs. They adopted maybe some of the same kind of things to get people from that particular culture to follow their religion, right? I'm sure that different religions in different parts of the world do the same thing. As people mingle, these things are just inevitable, right? They're things that happen. I mean, look at, there's a lot going on in the world today, right? And there's a certain faction of the country or population of the country that want to push for a utopia, and they want their utopia to be that everybody gets along, okay? But we only have to take a look at, I live in Boston, right? So we only have to take a look at the West End of Boston to truly understand why that's not going to work. And when you get people of all of these different cultures close together in a small area, their traditions and their ways that they show respect, their beliefs, their customs, all of that, they don't understand. And this is why there was such turmoil between Europeans and Native Americans. The two cultures just didn't understand each other. But to bring it back to the West End in Boston, there was so much trouble, a lot of crime, a lot of problems in the West End of Boston that I think it was 59, like in the late 50s and into like 1960, the answer was demolish the West End. You had Lithuanians, you had Germans, you had Italians, you had all these different cultures living together. Largely for the first time, they're immigrants and they're all in this small area. living together for the first time and who don't understand each other. And that's what caused the problems. Right? So what was the answer? The answer was, well, demolish the West End and build it over. Did it work? You know, that section of Boston's not horrible anymore. But is that the kind of solution that we needed? I don't know. What did it do? It ended up displacing a lot of people that, you know, that's like the poorest, right? They were the poorest population or the poorest section of the city. But how else do you do it? You can't force integration, right? I mean, that's essentially what was happening. Nobody forced it to happen, right? There wasn't one person directing it saying, "Hey, we're going to make all these things. You know, we're going to have all the people all the immigrants from Europe like live here in this small section." No, that's how it happened, right? There's no one force driving it. It's just how it happens. They get here, they don't have too much money, they're going to live where they can afford it, and that's going to be in the not so nice part of town. And then you've got all these different cultures living together. There's problems. What's the solution? You have to have, you know, people who have different customs need to have their own space to exist. They can't be forced into coexisting, right? If they don't want to. There can be tools that we utilize, right? Systems of communication that we can employ to help people get along. But why aren't we employing those first, as opposed to coming up with, you know, some of these ideas of like forced integration? You know, one of the tenets, I guess, of the First Amendment is that we have the freedom to associate with whoever we want to. Right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Is because when we associate with people that aren't like us, it's a breeding ground for trouble. That doesn't mean that we can't be intolerant, or you know what I mean? That doesn't mean we have to be intolerant of other people or the way that they think. That doesn't mean we can't be compassionate and think about things from their side or learn about their cultures so that we can better understand them. To be forced into that situation or to be forced to live under those ideals until we're ready, it's a recipe for disaster. And by ready, I mean we have to be willing to accept that, you know, hey, I'm going to be interacting with these people. I probably want to learn something about their culture. And to tie this back in, like, why am I going way off base, right? I'm not. Let's look at a movie like, what's that one Kevin Costner was in with the wolf? Dances with Wolves, right?
That's it.
Yep, Dances with Wolves, right? He was in, what, the American Army or whatever it was, right? And they had, they had one system of belief, and then he gets out in the middle of nowhere, and he's put into a situation where he's essentially forced to interact with Native Americans. And what happens? Through
there were some
volition.
conflicts.
Yeah, there were some conflicts at the beginning, right? Because the two cultures don't understand each other. But then through his own volition, he and the chief made an effort to understand one another and an effort to get along. Right? So is conflict inevitable?
Doesn't have to be.
No, but it very quite possibly is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see it pretty much everywhere when two cultures are forced to commingle, and more when there are more cultures that are forced to commingle. And like I said before, not forced by like someone's direction, but sometimes just forced by circumstance.
Well, there's when we had Dr. T.R. Kidder as a guest. I think it was at the start of the new year. We were talking about his papers on prehistoric climate change and how the archaic ceremonial center was destroyed by the land around it was destroyed by a flood. People couldn't utilize the land for about 500 years. It is that much desolation all throughout the Mississippi River Valley. The people in that part of the country had to go somewhere.
If they weren't all wiped out first, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The survivors would be refugees, and they would have to start their lives over somewhere else. They would probably have to be absorbed by
surrounding cultures.
The other archaic people wherever they went. Dr. Ken Sassaman talks about they had to these different cultures had to morph at some point just to survive. The smaller group's going to have to be absorbed into the larger community. It's some of the regional differences we've talked about. People with different backgrounds. It seemed like they were able to survive at one time when there was a massive natural disaster. So there is one sample of where we can learn from how the native peoples handled a catastrophic situation, and it was basically for survival.
Yeah,
it's really his talk as well as papers were very interesting. It's really got a lot out of him being a guest, but it is possible that people from different backgrounds can get together, and hopefully we can learn a lesson from the native people from 3,000 years ago.
Well, there are many lessons I think we could learn from the native peoples. Many, many lessons. But hey, you and I and Barbara were talking a bit before we came on the show about the Newport Tower. Why don't we wrap up the show by getting back to that?
Sure. Yeah. You had recently been to Rhode Island for some investigations. I was just asking if you were happened to be near the Newport Tower, and gave us a little background on your thoughts of it. But now's the time to delineate what you've learned from your investigations and contrast with other somewhat similar structures. So, Matt, go ahead and give us your theories of Newport Tower.
So I can't claim these theories, right? I'm the messenger here. So everything that you're about to hear, don't quote me exactly. This isn't my research, but I do find it quite interesting. And some of these are my observations, particularly what you're talking about, the other structure. So, what is the Newport Tower? The Newport Tower is a cylindrical, essentially 2-story stone structure in Newport, Rhode Island, hence the Newport Tower. And it's got 8 columns, and they're about 8 or so feet tall, maybe a little bit more. And they've got archways over the openings. And the rest of it is a cylindrical, hollowed out sort of structure that's still there in Newport, Rhode Island. Now, the first historical mention of the Newport Tower was in the first governor of Rhode Island's will. Now, his name was Benedict Arnold. He was not the traitor that we know by the same name. That was a great-great-grandson, I believe, of the governor. But anyway, the first mention of this structure is in his will in about the 1670s or so. And he says that he refers to it as my stone-built windmill.
Okay.
Or more precisely, my stone-built grist mill, I think it was, or something like that. Again, don't quote me. It's not my research. But so the historians will take that and say, Governor Benedict Arnold, he built it because he says so in his will. But this is an analogy from my buddy Larry, so I'm going to credit him because this is his. We were on the phone the other day, and he was explaining this, and I completely understand it anyway. But he says, if my uncle bought a house, and it was made of wood, and it was in, let's just say Plymouth, Massachusetts, and my uncle also bought a house, let's say in Newport, Rhode Island, and it was built of stone, and he left his house in Newport to me in his will, and he called it my stone-built house. Where was it said that the uncle built those houses himself?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. There's no place that is stated. So if you look at the will, an argument can be made that he didn't actually build it. It just says my, meaning he's the one that possesses it, stone built, which is a descriptor, mill or miln. It was MILN is the right word for it, proper word for it. So where does he actually say he built it? He doesn't. So there's an argument that can be made that he didn't actually build it, that he only possessed it. Okay? Now, historians and naysayers will get all hell-bent about this argument, because nobody was here before whoever, right? So some of the research, this is where it gets interesting. Some of the research, well, actually, let me hold off on that for a couple minutes. Let's talk about why it may not be a windmill first, because that ties into the other structure that you mentioned. So the other structure is Chesterton Windmill, and that's over in England. Now, this Governor Arnold, Benedict Arnold, was born and lived maybe, I forget the exact distance, but it's around 100 miles, I think, away. And that might be like as the crow flies, it might not even be exact, like how far it would take him, right? But, you know, he was further away from it, and then he had moved from England to, I think, the United States around the time when he might be like 11 or 12 or something. So somewhere around that age, he moved away from England. Okay. Now, the Chesterton Windmill and the Newport Tower, they might look similar because the Newport Tower has 8 columns, 8 cylindrical columns, but the Chesterton Windmill has 6 legs. And when you look at it, the shapes might look similar, but the construction is totally different. Okay? The legs on the Chesterton Windmill are squarish. And the blocks of stone were cut specifically to fit together. They're big, heavy blocks of stone. Why? Because when the weight of the structure on top of the legs is being blown by the wind, and you've got these big windmill arms out there, right? That creates a force, and the columns need to be strong enough to handle that amount of wind. When we look at the Newport Tower, the 8 columns are not built like that. They're cylindrical, and they're all loosely laid, although like cemented into place or mortared into place, loosely laid stone that weren't to, cut to fit together. Okay? And so the argument can be made that the force of the wind against the structure would have been enough to topple the structure because the legs wouldn't have been able to properly support it. Now, we know Newport is right there on the ocean, and we know that part gets ransacked with hurricanes when they come through. Mm-hmm. But even a strong wind off the ocean, let's just say it's a tropical storm, might that have been enough to do severe damage to a windmill built out of stone? That doesn't seem... it seems go ahead.
Possible.
Yeah, I mean, the thing would just fall over, right? If it's not, if the legs aren't built to support it. And here's another quick point. Find another windmill entirely built out of stone. There isn't one. Why? Probably because that type of design is not fit for it.
Probably the first person that tried it, had some kind of failure, and word got around, and this is a bad idea.
Right. There's reasons that we have building codes, right? Mm-hmm. We won't get into that story, but look up the Great Molasses Flood of Boston. That changed how buildings and structures had to be built. Like, there were codes put in place to say things have to be up to this certain spec. I'm not saying that windmills had that same thing, but people would have known, hey, don't build it a certain way because it's not going to work. You're going to run into problems like that. You would have had that knowledge amongst carpenters or whatever, right?
The guilds.
Yeah. So all right. So that has to do with the legs, right? Now let's talk about the rest of the structure. Over the years, multiple astronomical alignments have been made to different parts of this, right? There are windows that are in strange places. They're different sizes. Nothing about the placement of those are uniform, right? So you could take, people say, oh, well, the sun comes in my window every certain day of the year. I said, okay, well, how many days of the year does the sun go directly through one window or in one window and then out the other on the other side of the house? And it lights
up the Orphic egg.
Yeah, there's that. And then, just anybody, was your house designed that way to let the sunlight on the winter solstice through one window and out the other? It wasn't designed that way. I'm talking about design because I'm quoting my friend Patrick, who is doing most of the research. Design equals function. So if the structure is designed for the sun to go through it on that particular day, well, doesn't that tell you something about the function of the structure? And if it's not just one, but multiple alignments, well, what does that say? I mean, if anybody could come up with, hey, my house has one alignment, okay, that's one thing. That could be coincidence. But if your house has multiple alignments, well, maybe it was designed that way.
It's part of a pattern and that's the theme, one of the themes that has gone throughout tonight's show is anthropological patterns and the structures have patterns too.
Right. So now how can we prove that the structure would be any older than, when the governor had first owned the land? And
do the carbon-14 testing.
Yeah, there was that, and then there are arguments that it was tainted or done wrong, and even that some of the results were not presented properly in order to maintain the narrative that it belonged and was built by the governor, Benedict Arnold. But is there another way that we could date it? So,
celestial alignments?
Possible. But this is where things get really interesting, and I almost started down this a few minutes ago, but here's where it really gets interesting.
Okay, lay it on.
So I had asked my friend Patrick, who's, again, doing this research, I said, by this point of me asking the question, he had already found 4 maps on which it appears that the structure is there, predates its supposed construction. And these maps are, I think, like the early 1600s. Like, I think 1634, I'm not sure the exact dates, right? 1639, 1634,
That sounds right.
But they predate the supposed ownership of Benedict Arnold, right? So at the time I asked the question, I asked Patrick, which maps and what were the dates of the maps does the Newport Tower possibly appear on? So he sent me, a quick list and links to the maps. But to him, that was like, I don't know, maybe a light bulb. Because after that, He and another researcher, Steve
DeMarzo.
Steve DeMarzo, yeah. Great guy. They started looking for these maps, and all of these different places now are putting their old archives online. So they search all these different academic sites for maps. And I shit you not, but the count right now, as I last checked, was up to about 115 maps on which the tower possibly appears. And the research is just, anybody can go look for themselves, find the Facebook page called Phippsburg History Center. That's Phippsburg with a PH and 2 P's after that. Phippsburg, it's a town in Maine. Phippsburg History Center. Find that page on Facebook. All of the research is published there in real time. So if Pat's working on something, if Steve finds something, they research it, they look into it, they'll publish something on the page. Right? You don't have to wait for them to put out a book or anything, And I have to say, like, a lot of that stuff, like Pat's was in the Navy for about 27 or 30 years or something like that, right? So he's a naval guy. He's got this understanding of math that I just can't even comprehend. Math is like my weak point, right? So there's a lot that Pat talks about that's just over my head. Okay?
We don't do math on Nightlight.
Yeah, right. Like, it's just not the place for it. So, if you're reading through the page and you feel like some of it's over your head, it's okay. I feel that way too. But there's still a whole lot of interesting stuff there that you will understand. And it's just amazing, amazing research. And no one is coming out and debunking this because they can't.
If you have authentic maps, there's really nothing to debate.
Yeah.
You get some of those maps that, when Steve and Patrick were guests, there it is. We know, these are authentic maps going back like 400 years or so.
It goes. They're finding them back now to, I think the earliest one they have dated was between 1100 and 1199, and that just blows your mind. Like, there were even people mapping the coastline over here at that point.
Oh, and Bill Mann has shown, discussed the maps that from like the 14th century of New England, Eastern Canada, that have these like medieval looking structures.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
I mean, there's an explanation, right? What is it? There has to be more that we don't know. But this is the kind of research that has to be done, and I just feel like a lot of the academics are too lazy to actually do it. And maybe maybe lazy isn't the right word, right? Maybe it's just they're not moved to do it. I don't think anybody wants to be the one that rocks the boat.
Mm-hmm.
You
get that.
What do they say? Like, history is seldom made by
silent people.
The well-behaved.
Yeah.
but I don't know. The most damning evidence in the case for the structure being older, I believe, is some of the most recent posts that you'll find on Phippsburg History Center. And those posts are the graphs that Pat and Steve put together. And it when you look at that, it's like I can't possibly keep track of 115 maps, right? So it brings all of that together in one visual. And you look at it and you're just like, oh my God. I can't even begin to comprehend that, let alone formulate an argument against it. Now, it's not like they just looked at each map and said, oh, there's a little something there that looks like the tower. Let's just put it on the list. That's not how they did it. They looked at each map. Like I said, Pat's a Navy guy, right? So he knows what? Naval things. He knows he has all that naval knowledge. And he knows how to figure out on maps latitude and longitude. And so when you figure out the latitude and longitude for 115 or probably more maps, I know that there are some that they even ruled out because they just can't either replicate a result or, maybe the image that they see on the map isn't quite as strong as they need it to be. So they certainly have ruled things out. But for each one of these maps, it's vetted. And you can read those posts and you can see what they did to vet the map before they put it on the list. So you can't just look at that one image and say, oh, well, they just threw it together. No, they didn't. They scrutinized each map. They scrutinized the details of each map. They broke everything down on the map and they looked at it closely. Like at the beginning of this when we started talking about the legs, right? I brought you in and described for you the differences between the legs, right? So that you could visually understand it. They went to that depth and even deeper to scrutinize these maps. And when you see that come out, 115 or so posts, one for each map, and again, I didn't read them all. I can't possibly understand everything that's in there, but the ones that I did read, it's a very, very, very strong case for that particular map. And they did that with all 115. So to me, that's very, very, very interesting research. And I can't possibly begin to even formulate anything against it.
Yeah, Patrick and Steve I thought they presented a very thorough investigation. For it's kind of hard to. I think some of the maps are on the archive video, but I thought they presented their case very well. You do that with your, with the 7-8 minutes left, people can get a copy of your field notes for your examination of this stone chamber. I think that you did a very thorough job. And it's even brought up, Barbara's Secrets of the Stones video a couple times during tonight's discussion. she has everything thoroughly documented on there, and photos and maps and all kinds of stuff on where they're located, more detailed information on there. So I think we have when we've been doing these a little bit before, like pre-contact, proto-historic time period shows. The guests we've had, I think, have presented top quality documentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
The information there. There are people who do. They're a little out there with their interpretations. We'll be getting into that in September when we do a UFO show. But there are some really good researchers out there who do just as professional job as the college professors who are in charge of these digs, and they're just very passionate, wanting to get history right. And several guests we've had are going back 400 to 600 years, looking at that time period. I've been really impressed with their research.
Yeah. That's really what we care about, is getting it right. And sometimes,
that's the impression I got.
Yeah, history is, a lot of it is recorded and a lot of it isn't, right? A lot of it is buried. And the only way we can understand it is to unearth it. And, whether that's through archival research or an archaeological process, that's how we're going to do it. But science is an ever-evolving field. It's not static. And to think that any one part of it can or should be static, it detracts from the truth, ultimately, is what it does. When, I've looked at a couple of things, old field reports, and I've tried to check it with new tools and new ways, and I won't get into it because we don't have the time. And I've gone to old researchers and I said, hey, I was able to check this, theory that you had in this report 40 years ago, and, unfortunately, it doesn't hold up. And I'm astounded that I could even pick that out. And now that we have different tools, I'm able to see that, and they didn't have that back then. But I'm just looking to create a connection with the person who wrote that field report. And when the response that I get is, they're offended that I found something different, that their idea didn't hold up, to me, that's the wrong response.
Yeah.
I would imagine that if somebody came to me in 40 years from now and said, hey, Matt, I'm looking into your research and I'm finding something different, I'd want to know. By all means, tell me what you found that's different, because the only reason you found something different is because you're standing on my shoulders, right? I'm standing on the shoulders of the person whose field report I read, right? And if I can see a little bit further, it's because of the work that he did. I'm not looking to detract from him or bring him down. I'm looking for a connection with him.
Right.
To say, hey, look, we both looked at this site. And I looked at something that you couldn't possibly have seen back then. Talking like satellite imagery, just so that there's a specific thing. But they didn't have access to that. They couldn't possibly have. So how could he have, figured that out? He couldn't have. So rather than say, hey, tell me what you found, it's a different thing. But that's an example of somebody not wanting to get to the truth. And I care about the truth. So 40 years from now, somebody says, hey, you were wrong. By all means, explain it to me and show me something new. Because I want to learn. I want the truth. And if you're close to the truth than I am, I want to know.
All right. Hey, Matt, we're down to like 90 seconds.
Okay.
Do you want to give the listeners, your website, any contact information, upcoming appearances, anything like that?
Sure. So you spelled it out earlier. It's NEHSSIE. Now you can find that at the .com, so Nessie.com. If you're interested in getting the field report that we talked about and my upcoming book, when I'm done with it, it will be released in the same place. Go to book.nessie.com. That's NEHSSIE. That's how I say it, Nessie. Book.nessie.com. You can find it. Search for Nessie on Facebook. We have facebook.com/Nessie. That's the Facebook page. Join the group where you can share things with us and others at facebook.com/groups/Nessie. Search for Nessie on YouTube, Instagram, Gab, or search for Matt Adams on Gab. Search for Nessie on Pinterest and I think Twitter.
Okay. All right. Hey, we are down to just a few seconds. Matt, I want to thank you for being a guest, and thanks, Barbara, for producing, and we'll see everyone soon.